Hello, and today I'm going to show you how to land the Su-25 in DCS World. Now, first of all, we're going to look at some pictures that I've created, and the first one shows us the picture of an aeroplane. The aeroplane's obviously the black object, and the arrow represents where it's going. And then we've also got a runway, which is the grey thing with the dashed line in the middle, and the arrow on that represents the runway centre line. So as we can see with this one, the aeroplane is going in the correct direction, so it's the same direction as the runway, but it's actually offset to the right. And then if we look at the next picture that I've got, the aeroplane is now aligned in the right position, so it's aligned along the runway, but the direction is incorrect. And so for the plane to be on the correct approach, both the direction and the position need to be along the line of the runway. So if we look at the next picture, we can show you how to do that. If we go from the starting position, so we're pointing to the left of the runway. If we're on the right hand side and we want to get to on the runway, we have to make a correction to the left of the runway. So as you can see, the arrow is pointing to the left of the runway on this. And then as you get closer and closer, you turn around onto the right and you make a nice curved path until you're pointing down the runway, as you can see represented by the black line. If we go on to the next picture, you can see that once you get to the end of that, the aeroplane is pointing in the correct direction. And now the next picture shows us several approach paths. Now this is from the side, so the black rectangle in the bottom right represents the runway, and the three lines represents different approach angles. I'll show you some approach images in a second, but this is can show you the top one is a high approach, so you're coming in at too steep an angle. The middle one is the correct approach, so you're coming in at just the right angle, and the bottom one is the incorrect approach. It's too low and you could hit into obstacles. It very much depends on the aircraft you're using. The Su-25 handles a bit like an airliner, so you kind of have to do quite low approaches, but depending on how much drag from the flaps and everything you can do much steeper approaches. And normally a steeper approach is better, because if your engines go, it means you can normally make it to the runway. That's called a glide approach. Alright, we'll look at some pictures now. Alright, now I've got two pictures. The first one is what it looks like when the runway is much lower, when you're much lower down. And as you can see, it looks very different. The runway appears more squashed. And then the next picture we'll have will be the higher approach, and as you can see, the runway is much more elongated and you can see more of the runway. So if you take a look at those pictures, flick between the two, and you can kind of see what it's supposed to look like. You want somewhere in between, and from that you have to judge whether you're too high or too low, but that kind of comes from experience anyway. Before we look at the video, we're going to first go through how the controls are going to affect your speed and your altitude. So it's kind of counterintuitive with the aeroplane. The throttle, air brakes and flaps will all control your altitude or descent rate, and your angle or the stick position, so whether it's forwards or backwards of the center, will control your airspeed. So an example of this, if you power on with the throttle, you'll increase your you'll decrease your descent rate, or you'll start climbing. So or if you power off with the throttle, your descent rate will increase and you won't be able to climb anymore. The same thing kind of works for the same reason with the air brakes. They're kind of like a little extension to your throttle, so they'll make you descend even faster. And the flaps, because they add extra drag, they'll make you descend even faster still. So you can use the flaps and the air brakes as so if you've already reached the stop on the throttle, you're already at zero throttle, you can use the flaps and the air brakes to halt your to increase your descent, sorry, and if you're a little too high, which you'll see me do in the video. And now the airspeed is only controlled by the stick position. So if the stick is further back, the aeroplane will slow down and maintain a speed where the stick is. If the stick is further forwards, the aeroplane will speed up. Okay, and if you put the air brakes out and you want to slow down, what you'll have to do is the air brakes will try and make you descend. So if you've got the air brakes out, then you need to, as your speed will slow down, you need to keep on pulling the stick back more and more to maintain a lower speed. And then when you drop the flaps and everything, you'll you can let go of the stick and you'll maintain a much slower speed. And it depends on what the aircraft is trimmed for. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the landing I did earlier. So, okay, now I'm going to walk you through the landing. So what we're doing at the first is we're pointed towards the runway, but we're offset to the left, which means we need to correct to the right. So we're pointing our nose to the right of the end of the runway, and we're going to fly until we are lined up with the runway. And then when we're about to be lined up with the runway, we're going to make a left turn. So you can see we're extending the air brakes now, and if you look at the speed up in the top left, it's going to start decreasing. So what I'm doing at the same time as having the air brakes out is I'm pulling the stick back more and more, and you can see that on the display on the right, pulling it back more and more, and the speed is slowing down. So in a second, so you can see we're now coming around to the left to correct onto our path, and in a second here we're going to put the gear down. So we've just put the gear down, and that will give us a little more drag, so we're going to have a little higher descent rate now. We're going to put the flaps down now, and that will also give us a little higher descent rate, so we may need extra throttle. You see our speed is now at 330. This is a good approach speed, so I put the air brakes in because we don't want to descend too fast, and now we've got the landing flaps out. So at this point we're quite high, so we may not need any throttle at all. At the moment you can see I got no throttle on. And what we're going to do is round out. So this is where we pull up to slow ourselves down. So we're going 310 at the moment. So just before we get towards the ground, we're going to pull up the aircraft nice and gently. And we're going to kind of hover over the runway for a second as our speed bleeds off. It's going 290, 280, 270, and then we're going to flare at the last second just to arrest our final rate of descent. And there you go, touchdown. So now what we want to do is put the air brakes out, keep the nose up to aero brake, and then when we're ready to put the parachute out, we're going to drop the nose, then hit P for parachute. And then we're going to apply the brakes with full back stick, so this prevents the nose wheel from being damaged. I hope that landing tutorial helped. Thank you very much for watching.